AI is going to be like the pigeon. It's going to say, can I drive the bus? Can I do that for you? Can I do that? Do you want help with that? Do you want me to rewrite this? And, the pigeon constantly wants to drive the bus. But again, you have to remember it's a pigeon. And nobody wants to live in a world where the pigeons are driving all the buses. So you have to stay in control. You have to control where the bus is going. You can take help from the pigeon, but you never, ever want to let the pigeon drive the bus.
Hello and welcome to the Education Vanguard. I'm Justin.
I'm Benjamin.
And we're delighted today to be joined by Douglas, who's a computer science teacher at the Menlo School in Silicon Valley. So for all those tools we take for granted, from social media to AI, Douglas is teaching the kids of those parents that are at the forefront of that. He's had a long career with a variety of different leadership roles outside of school, including being on the development committee for the AP Computer Science Principles course. He's an ADE, Microsoft Global Minecraft Ambassador, and was a research fellow at MIT Teaching Systems Lab, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well that I'm sure we'll get into on the podcast. And so I really think Douglas is an interesting guy because his story of his teaching and his life has really been touching all of these key trends that we've seen in education over the last 20, 30 years. And at the moment, he's at the forefront of the AI. And he'll be joining us at Hong Kong at 21C next March, and also be keynoting our STEAM and Makers Symposium next February. I've never had the pleasure of meeting Douglas face to face, but I was connected, in the small world that we have, by a good friend of mine who heard him speak at the beginning of the year PD day in Cleveland, a school he works at. And I believe his comment was actually really good. He said he's the best speaker he's ever seen at a school PD day. I know Jeff is a hard man to please. So I'm very excited to be talking with Douglas today. So welcome to the podcast, Douglas.
Thank you, Justin and Benjamin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Can you give just a bit more of an introduction to yourself and maybe describe the context where you are right now?
Sure. So currently I'm an AI educator and a computer science teacher at the Menlo School in Atherton, California. I've been teaching about 34 years now. And, I originally started my career teaching elementary school kids. I actually started at the Museum of Science in Boston. I was teaching hands-on science. And so for me, I think my entire career has been about kind of taking things apart and figuring out how they work. And it's no different now today. I'm in the process of kind of demystifying AI for myself, first and foremost, and then secondly, for all of our incoming ninth graders. So our 13 and 14-year-olds, they're coming into our high school. For many of them, this is the third year, I think, that they've been really using AI. And unlike the rest of us, they're diving into it fearlessly and discovering all kinds of things. And for us as teachers, we're trying to keep up with them. We're trying to honestly share a lot of their enthusiasm about it. For them, it seems like magic. I think my job is kind of demystifying it, but also trying to show them where some of the guardrails are and not be frightened of it, but also I think to respect it as a technology and find ways that it can enhance our learning rather than take shortcuts. So it's certainly been quite a wild ride, and it's pretty wild now. But I love doing what I'm doing. I love working with kids, and I love learning new things every day.
Awesome. So hearing you talk about a lot of the things you've done and working with kids, as I was hearing you talk, I was thinking about this idea of makerspace, and I think you've worked with kids with computer science and coding and sort of taking these ideas and making things with them. And what I've seen with AI, I feel like is almost like it's creating this new maker space. It's a space where kids can actually create things in new ways, in ways that they haven't done before. And even with code, right? So you can actually use AI to code and create new things. So I think maybe we were just sort of chatting before the show got started, and you were saying this may be different. It's like an inflection point almost. So can you talk about sort of maybe what you've seen with your students and maybe bucket in this idea of sort of maybe a new space we're seeing where kids can actually engage in learning or express their learning or, ideas in new ways? Or do you agree with the sentiment that this is a space where kids can engage in learning in new ways?
Well, I mean, I think for us, Makerspace has meant something very specific. We've got this $1 million makerspace in our campus with laser cutters and 3D printers and a whole wood shop and all kinds of things. And many other schools have those as well. But I think what's very exciting is that now every student essentially has a makerspace on their laptop. We've always thought about the makerspace as something like if you can dream it, you can build it. We've wanted there to be much less of a barrier between things that kids can think of and what they can immediately go in and have the tools to make real. And from a software standpoint, you don't necessarily need all the big machines and everything else, but they've got software tools. They've got, ease on their computer. They've got chatbots, things that they can dream up, whether it's a slide presentation or some kind of an app. There's much less of a barrier now to creating it. In a physical makerspace, we think about safety rules, of course, and we think about programming languages and interfaces and protocols. With AI, the biggest language right now is English. So whatever language they're using to communicate, they literally just explain and speak out what they want, and it creates it. And I think that's very exciting because I have kids in my classroom who would not describe themselves as coders, and yet just last week they built a web app that would help someone communicate who had lost their ability to speak. And so just being able to create a prototype for something like that in the space of a day, where it would have taken probably a couple of weeks to program on top of maybe a year or so of studying computer science, it's really extraordinary. And I think it's opening up so many opportunities for unlocking creativity in many different disciplines.
I want to sort of build on something you're saying just there, Douglas. I wonder, is AI in schools, and maybe this is a more general question, is it taking away computer science and programming, or is it making everyone able to do computer science and programming? Is that a fair delineation?
Well, we've typically had a couple of tracks, even within our own computer science department. So everybody takes our Intro to Computer Science course, which really gives them a grounding in how computers work, how data works, bits and bytes and binary. But then there are two tracks, and the kids have traditionally split along two tracks. There are kids who have gone towards going deeper into a different language, studying Java, taking the AP Computer Science A course, and then moving from there onto our Advanced Topics course, which dives deeper into the mathematics and the theory. We've also had a separate track that is just about building stuff. Kids that want to essentially just build cool things that help other people, solve real problems for real people. So kids have built all kinds of things. They've built apps that do useful things that solve problems. And we haven't tended to teach any one particular language. Kids will learn whatever language they need. If they're making a web tool, they would use HTML, CSS, JavaScript. If they're making an iPhone app, they're going to learn Swift. And so we've typically had both of those tracks. What we're seeing now is kids that want to build stuff aren't necessarily taking the 1-year Intro to Computer Science course because they don't need to, if they just want to build some cool things. And they build cool things they vibe code it, and they describe it, and they're able to make things that were previously unimaginable for students with very little computer science experience. But what those students are finding is you can go so far. You can create things of a certain complexity, and then you kind of get stuck because AI either won't create it or it creates something that's different from what you want. And you don't have the ability to understand how to change it to make it better. And so for a lot of those students, they're left a little hungry. It's very fulfilling at first, but if you don't understand the foundational principles of computer science, you can only go so far. And then the kids who are taking the other track, who are really diving deeper into the foundations of computer science, when they also decide to use AI, there is no limit to what they can do. And often what they're creating is not something that they wouldn't be able to create on their own. They're able to do it much more quickly. And in fact, as a computer science teacher, it's the same thing for me. I created a web app the other day for a class that probably took me 45 minutes to create. And so I did it to support an activity that I was doing with my kids. If I had sat down to code it on my own, it would have taken a week, which means I probably wouldn't have done it just to service that one
Mm.
class. But now I'm able to create lots more tools, and I can create them very quickly and efficiently because I understand how to code. And so this is the point that I make to kids. If you love coding, take a computer science class. You're going to get to do even more of it, and you will be a better user of AI if you have that background knowledge and you know how to at least do the stuff. If you just want to build stuff, you don't really need to know computer science anymore to be able to build some pretty amazing things.
That's very cool. So what
Yeah.
about sort of like the idea that um you got to learn the fundamentals before you move to the higher stuff? Because like in your example, maybe the kids, they reached a certain point and then they sort of burnt out. So would it be beneficial for them to actually get to that point and realize that they actually need some additional skills, or they need to spend some time, understanding the complexities of what they're trying to do to then move forward? Or some people like, say, well, they need to spend the time to power through it. But there's also the argument that fail fast. So like like you just said, you're condensing the amount of time it takes to run through these iteration cycles. So you're actually able to sort of, in theory, progress more quickly. What are your thoughts on that? And it's not a binary situation, but what have you seen so far with your kids?
Yeah, so I think, well, it's interesting. We actually for the first time had a slight drop in enrollment in our computer science classes this year, and we're not exactly sure what all the reasons are. At our school, I think it's pretty complex. There was a new arts requirement, so a lot of the freshmen ended up taking art instead for their elective. But what we do know is that the group of computer science students that we have now, even though it's smaller, seem to be more motivated to learn computer science. And I think it's because the kids who are kind of on the fence about whether they weren't sure if they wanted to take computer science or not, often they would take computer science just to try it out. We're not getting those kids anymore, I think. Those kids who just want to try it out and are curious are then turning to vibe coding, and they're creating stuff on their own without going to a computer science course. And they're saying, I don't need this course anymore to be able to build cool stuff. And you know what? I'm totally fine with that. I think it's great. I think actually the more kids that feel empowered to learn and create stuff on their own and not feeling like they have to take an elective class to do it, I think the better off we are as a school. I'm also teaching all incoming freshmen how to create web apps using AI. And so I'm taking kids, every day who have no experience with coding. And by the time they walk out of class, they've built an interactive web app tool or toy. And so, I think that's very powerful. And I'm convinced that some of those kids will kind of go farther with it on their own and kind of reach a certain point where they say, you know what, maybe I should take a class. And maybe kids who didn't see themselves as being successful in computer science anymore will start seeing the value of it. So I really
Mm.
think that will be the case.
I tend to agree, especially as you're talking about, like one of the, I'm a recovering, coder and computer science teacher. And, what you said before is true. It took a year before you could even build something that was mildly interesting, right? And that's very demotivating if you're not inherently kind of interested in some of the mathematical, conceptual aspects of programming and computer science. But now if you can see what you can do almost instantly, maybe that gives you the motivation to kind of work backwards. So totally see how that could happen. I want to ask you just a more general question, because it sounds, you're moving more towards this being a kind of AI educator, as you just sort of described yourself. Do you think that the AI kind of the movement towards AI in education is it an overhyped or is it underhyped at the moment?
I think that this new technology is pretty unprecedented, actually. I think it's transformative and it is unprecedented. And the speed with which the technology is being adopted, certainly by the students, I think has, to be honest, it's caught us off guard. The students really have very little hesitation to dive into trying out AI and using AI. And here we are in October, and we've got an entire group of students who, many of whom basically spent all summer playing with all of the different AI tools that are available to them. And if you're a teacher who has been sort of had their head in the sand on this because, I mean, let's face it, all of us adults, like we know how to do this stuff without AI. I mean, I was reluctant to use it for a long time because I already know how to write. I already know how to code. Don't really need to use it. But for students who are, who don't have those skills, and now all of a sudden you have this incredible thing that does that, it's incredibly beguiling. So I think, we have this divide, and I think students have always been faster than adults at adopting new technology. I think it's, even more so in this case. And I think that is something that is concerning for me. I think about AI education sort of along two strands. One of them is AI fluency, which is the ability to quickly and easily use the tools, knowing how to prompt it, um, knowing how to recover from mistakes, knowing the difference between the different tools, knowing how to pipe the output of one tool into another tool as its input, and so coming up with projects that are the result of multiple AI tools. Like those are all fundamental AI fluency skills. And then there's AI literacy, which is really having a good grounding in understanding AI's role in society, issues of ethics and bias around using AI, being able to recognize situations where maybe you don't want to use AI, or maybe where the AI is not entirely correct. That's AI literacy. What we find is our education is trying to do both things. We're trying to teach kids AI fluency and AI literacy. But what I'm finding is that many of the kids coming in already have the AI fluency piece. What they don't have is the AI literacy piece. And many teachers don't have either one of those. So we're really trying to do a good job with professional development to teach teachers both of those things. And for the students, we're really focusing on the AI literacy piece. So it's, it's challenging. And honestly, to be honest, like I think sometimes I'm thinking like the gap is widening because the kids are progressing along both tracks faster than many of the teachers are.
Well, I think that's super interesting, Douglas, because while you were talking, I was remembering I was on a bike ride this past summer, and I was catching up with a friend I hadn't seen in a while. He's a PhD, he teaches at university, and he was dead set against LLMs, like AI tools, right, in schools, because he teaches first year medical students, right? And so all he sees are kids trying to use AI to, to get good grades in his class or shortcut assignments. And so I said, well, how are you using, AI tools? And he goes, oh, I refuse to use them. I'm not using them at all. And I was like, oh, okay. And so we had some really interesting conversations. And I thought it was really interesting to view, these tools through his lens, which is very, very different than my lens, which, it sounds like maybe you and I share some sort of thinking around how to use these in an educational setting, or the benefits, or, things we need to sort of pay attention to. But I'm also thinking the students in his class don't really have a choice, actually, to build fluency around these tools, because this is their reality, right? And so what is our responsibility as educators to engage ethically and to help build proper, sort of, behaviors that are in line with, that reflect our values, or the values of our institutions and stuff. So what are those conversations like, in your circles? What's being talked about in that sense?
Yeah. Well, I can give you an example. I taught a class just yesterday on writing with AI. And basically, what I think is we think of these workflows, and I was an English teacher. I have workflows for teaching writing that don't involve AI, never did, and the kids are fine with it. But that time is past. Like we don't have a period of time anymore where students will be writing without the use of AI. I mean, whether they're using Grammarly or other kinds of things, like they're already using AI and they will be using AI. So I need to come up with new workflows. And sort of for me, the guiding principle that I share with kids is based on this children's book called Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. And I tell them basically with AI is going to be like the pigeon. It's going to say, can I drive the bus? Can I do that for you? Can I do that? Do you want help with that? Do you want me to rewrite this? And the pigeon constantly wants to drive the bus, but again, you have to remember it's a pigeon. And nobody wants to live in a world where the pigeons are driving all the buses. So you have to stay in control. You have to control where the bus is going. You can take help from the pigeon, but you'd never, ever want to let the pigeon drive the bus. And so I introduced that to them. And then I introduced them to a framework for writing. And the framework that I use is called the Story Spine, and it was developed by Pixar. And Pixar, which has created all of these amazing movies like Toy Story and Finding Nemo, they follow a pretty similar formula where you establish the setting and the characters, and then there's this conflict event that happens, and then there's this rising action, and then there's a climax at the end, and then there's a resolution. And everything from Star Wars to Pixar films, they all follow this same kind of path. The hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, follows something very similar. So I teach them this framework, and then I basically have them develop an outline themselves by writing a setting, brainstorming some characters. They can use AI to help them brainstorm, but they have to write at least a few sentences about, here's the character, here are their goals, here are their motivations. And then I have them write about a sentence like, okay, so what's normal for this character? Once upon a time, they did these things, and every day they did these things. And then all of a sudden, something happens. And then because of that, this other thing happens. And because of that, this other thing happens. And because of that, this other thing happens until finally. And so at each step, the kids are doing their own writing. Now, when we get to the end, then we say, feed this into an AI and say, help me write a 150-word introduction for these characters for the opening scene. But they already know, they have the outline of the opening scene. And then write the climax, write the ending of it. And then students at that point can then go and either write on their own, the middle part of it, or they can have AI write more of it, but it's following this outline that they've set up. And so by the time they get to the end, they have a story. They did not write the story. I think we need a new word for this, maybe story crafting or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
But they
Mm-hmm.
have been like a director. If you see the Oscars, at the Oscar Academy Awards, the best director is not the person who was behind the camera. The best director is the one who took all of the different footage, all of the different camera angles and shots, and decided these work, this is the wrong tone, this needs to be reshot, and they assembled it together and they made this masterpiece that fit the vision that they had in their head. Perhaps the workflow that we teach with writing is much more similar to what a director would do, where AI essentially has the role of the camera people and the film crew that's helping to realize your vision. But you are the one in control throughout. You're not saying, I want a movie about this, do the whole thing. That's like letting the pigeon drive the bus. And so I think our workflow will look different because the tools are different. And I think that's good.
Almost like what you're describing there is writing that's going from being sort of a technical skill that you before to being something that's much more co-constructed. It's almost like you're managing the process, but you're not, doing every single piece, every single word, every single space yourself.
That's correct. And I mean, here's the thing for me. I have so much faith in the kids in my classroom. My kids are amazing kids. They're so creative. I get upset when people call them lazy. They're not lazy. They're using this technology not because they're lazy and not because they just want the time to go do other things and watch TV. What they're doing is they're freeing up time, and then they're just as busy. They're taking on more things. They're doing grander. They have a grander vision. They have taken the effort that they would have spent doing the task at this level, and they've shifted everything up. So their low end is now where the high end was a few years ago in terms of effort and design. And so, I have faith in my kids that when they use these very powerful tools, it will shift their capabilities so they will be able to do more and be more creative. I don't see them slacking because of the tools. They are working just as hard, if not harder. I just am trying to identify what are those new skills that they are developing and that we need to then start teaching. And so I'm taking my cue off my amazing kids and watching them.
Helping you, create stuff or offloading tasks, but don't trust everything they do, without checking it.
Right.
I'm wondering, Douglas, what do you say to the English teacher? Maybe there's one at your school, I don't know, that says, well, kids aren't going to learn those technical skills anymore about writing, and that's a problem. Or do you see it as it's just all writing is going to be AI co-constructing?
No, I agree. I mean, I think we still need to teach writing. I don't think AI can be a replacement for understanding how to do basic writing. But I think maybe I think maybe working with AI to co-create things becomes the voice. Like we've always talked in English about helping kids to discover their own voice. And for many teachers, that means absent AI. If you have AI in it, it's not your voice. Well, maybe it is. Maybe to a certain extent it is. And it's not solely your voice, but maybe working along with it. And if you know enough English to be able to edit it and work with it, maybe working together with AI, you
Mm.
come up with some composite, some cyborg version of your voice, and that maybe that is your voice. So I think I would
I think it's a
encourage us to be
continuum.
more open-minded about, about all of that.
I think it can be a continuum because, like you mentioned earlier, Grammarly, right? So Grammarly is going to bang up your grammatically incorrect, sentences or emails, into something that sounds great, and also, think about kids who may be dyslexic or, have some other sort of things that may be getting in the way of them expressing themselves fully. And, they're able to lean on these tools in ways that really help them, contribute at their highest point of, potential, and so like my son, we were talking about the other day, they were using AI to create images in class and it was like a light bulb moment for him because he just typed something in and it pumps out this image. I wasn't it wasn't near what he wanted, and so he spent the next 30 minutes recrafting his prompts and refining and refining and refining to get closer to what he wanted. So he ended up spending a long time and really diving into descriptive language to get it closer to what he wanted, right? So he wasn't satisfied with what he got. He had the perseverance and learned how to, accurately describe what was in his mind in a way that produced that sort of thing. So there are many sort of ways to approach this, right? And also there's a continuum, right, of how you engage with these.
Exactly. And what your son was doing is one of those new skills for this age of AI that I haven't quite got a neat sort of name for yet, but that ability to kind of look at it and revise the prompt and then look at it again. I mean, I think that there's critical thinking involved there. If it's not art, if it's writing, certainly the core skill there is reading to a much greater extent than I think kids have had to do in the past, where they're just reading their own writing or the writing of their classmates. If you're crafting something using AI, you might have to read 4 or 5 different versions of the same scene because AI can pump out the words a lot faster than any human being can. But you need to read it carefully to say, well, the tone here is not quite right because it doesn't match all of the other stuff. So for
Yeah.
sure, you need to be able to develop these new skills. I think what worries me is, I mean, I'm a writer, and I've spent I learned to write before AI, and I've practiced it, and I think I'm good at it. And when I'm working with AI, sometimes I'll design a scene, and honestly, objectively, like I think the version that AI came up with is actually better than my own writing. And that's sobering if you're trying to write a book or write a book of short stories. That here's this technology that is even better than I consider myself to be. And I'm an adult. What is it like if you're a student and you've never developed those skills and you have this tool that's just better at everything? It's better at doing art. It's
Mm.
better at articulating your thoughts than you are. It's better at coding. I think my goal for our students is that they have at least one thing that they feel like they have an expertise about, whether it's music or writing or coding, and that they're able to really truly collaborate with AI on the same level where they can understand where the AI is going wrong and they don't have to take it at its word because they understand. They have a deep understanding of that subject. Like, I think students all need to have at least one subject where they feel that kind of mastery. But I don't think they need that in every subject. And if that used to be the goal of traditional school is that we get all students to that level in mathematics and science and writing and everything. Like I'm not sure if that should be the same goal anymore.
That's really, really interesting, Douglas. And I tend to agree. I've always been frustrated with school that, every kid has to sort of is in the same box. You know what I mean? You can't specialize, you can't follow your passion. And I think with AI really kind of leveling everyone up in many, many different domains, maybe that idea of specialization and really leading into the thing that you are, interested in and good at, maybe there's a way that we can construct school to allow that to happen. But I think a big part of that is driven by a word that we haven't mentioned yet, which is assessment. And we had a question here talking about how you assess creativity and collaboration. And it strikes me actually that what we've been talking about and whether you've been talking about how writing is changing with AI is that you're talking about essentially humans collaborating with the computer, right? And I think in schools we've often struggled with how do we assess work that is collaborative, right? How much do you know? How much of this product, if it was a collaborative project between two students, was one student versus the other, and how do you do that in a fair way? And now it's that same issue, but kind of with everything, right? Where AI is being used by students in their work. So how do you assess student work now when students are essentially collaborating with AI all the time? And essentially everything is a collaborative project, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, I think the biggest thing is shifting my assessment from summative assessment to formative assessment. So I really grade the process even more than the product. I want kids to take risks. I want them to collaborate and work with each other. I want them to fail and then learn how to recover from that. I think those are all really important. And if I put all of the points on the final project, then I'll have kids who will shortcut the process just to give me something in the end that is a good product and hope to do well. In my class, they don't do well if they do that. So they need to keep notes throughout of what they're doing. And I need to assess them at various points throughout that process rather than just at the end. I mean, we actually had a student in another class who did the final project, and then the teacher required them to write a reflection, and they wrote the beautiful reflection about the process and what they learned at each point. And they had AI actually wrote the reflection for them. So it didn't really count, But luckily for me as a computer science teacher, we have a tool that allows me to check in on kids and check their progress, even though they're collaborating all the way throughout. And it's an incredibly powerful tool. It's called GitHub. And so we've been using GitHub version control software to have kids do not just coding, but even just writing. And so at every point, they're told, okay, you need to file a commit. You need to describe in the commit message what you did. And if you worked with someone else, you need to file a pull request and merge those changes in. And so we're teaching kids this language of version control. Every freshman at Menlo School has a GitHub account and is taught how to use it, how to file, PRs and do commit messages. And we do it for writing, we do it for music, we do it for all kinds of things. I think it's an essential skill. When we start identifying what are these new skills in the age of AI, I think a big one is going to be reading and critical thinking. A big one's going to be version control, because we are entering an age of abundance where kids will be able to, like they've never been able to before, create multiple versions of the same scene, create multiple branches and say, okay, I'm writing a story with a complex storyline. What if we branch off from this and suppose this happens to this character, and let's follow that down that branch until we decide maybe we don't like the way that story's going. We need to back up 2 or 3 points to the last fork and then take this other branch. And version history in Google Docs doesn't cut it. It's linear. We're going to need something that is multi-branching, and people who have been using GitHub, recognize that's a really useful tool. So I think we should be teaching version control to all students, and that's where we are right now.
I think that's great because it sort of values using real world tools, in innovative ways. And it also, that's sort of a constructivist approach that says like learning is a process that takes place over time. And you're giving kids multiple opportunities to demonstrate their understanding at different points, right? That you can sort of use as waypoints in that process. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I couldn't help but think though, like when you were talking about every student in grade 9, it gets a GitHub account, trying to tell most of the high school principals that I know, you know, do all of your students have a GitHub account? And the account, I think their first question would be, what's GitHub? It's pretty unusual, I would say, right, for high school kids to get GitHub accounts, and in fact, for computer science to be like a subject that everybody takes. Is that because of where the school is, do you think? Is that sort of a property of the environment where you are?
I think a lot of it is due to the fact that we're located right in the heart of Silicon Valley, and a lot of our kids are the children of executives who are working and programmers and system engineers who are working all over the Bay Area. And if you think about all the big companies that are driving a lot of the AI revolution, so NVIDIA, Google, Meta, Anthropic, Apple, I mean, they all live within about a 50-mile radius. And so there's a tremendous amount of knowledge here, a lot of support from parents for learning computer science. I had a father one day at a parent meeting just sort of start crying, and he said, "For the first time, my daughter understands and appreciates what I do for a job because you've challenged her so much in computer science. I've been able to help her with the work that she's doing. Thank you for teaching her so that she appreciates what we do every day." So it's a unique place to teach.
That's really amazing. I wanted to just maybe move into the kind of wrap up part of the conversation. And I feel like we could keep talking for a long time about AI and
Yeah.
everything else. But we do have to respect everyone's time. So I wanted to just ask 2 wrap up questions. The first is, what's a belief you held early in your career that you've changed your mind about?
What's a belief that I held early in my career that I have changed my mind about? I'm not sure if this is related to AI. Perhaps it is in some way. I remember when I was teaching elementary school, this was before I was a parent, I would have parents asking me about whether it was okay for their kids to watch television. And I would respond with what I had learned from graduate school, which was that television is okay with your kids as long as you are co-viewing. What's happened is that when adults watch TV with their kids and they can moderate for their kids and talk about this is why this character is doing that thing, the kids' understanding of their social intelligence, their cognitive abilities, they go much higher. And so television can be a really powerful tool when it is moderated with an adult. And so I would sort of somewhat blithely tell parents, well, you know, of course, television's fine as long as you're there watching with the kids. And the parent would kind of gulp and go, okay. Then I was a parent of a 2-year-old. And that's when I realized the reason I grew up watching Sesame Street every day at 5 p.m. was because my mother would sit me down in front of the TV so she could make dinner and do all of the things after work that she needed to do. Like TV was there so she could do other things. It wasn't so she could sit there and watch it with me. As much as she would have loved to do that, she didn't have time to do that. And so I spent a lot of time watching TV by myself just so my parents could be parents. I didn't really realize that until I actually had kids. So sometimes I think back on that story and I think about what the research says is the best way to do things is sometimes not the reason why we do these things. With AI, of course, we know it's much better if kids use it as a component to their learning and help them exercise their critical thinking. I'm trying to model that for kids, but honestly, a lot of the time, the reason why kids are using AI is not to become better thinkers. It's because this thing is due tomorrow. I'm sick of it and I just want to get it done. So I think that perspective is important to keep in mind, sadly.
Yeah, we definitely need to sort of balance out the, theory-based ideals with the reality, right, of that we're actually in, right?
You sure?
Definitely had a similar experience as a parent as well, going from what I used to say to parents when I was a tech director to actually dealing with it myself. Ben, do you want to ask the final wrap-up question?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about a lot of things. You shared a little bit about sort of your background and your history and sort of where you are now, but like what are you interested or excited about to learn next? Like what's an area of interest to you? What's piquing your interest right now?
So right now I have been diving into writing novels. So I have about 3 or 4 novels that are sort of in the process of crafting along with AI. I also have a 50,000 word novel that I wrote about almost 20 years ago about Hawaii, which is where I grew up. And I wrote that well before there was any AI at all, and it is badly in need of editing. And I've always been thinking, gee, I need to find an editor. And now my next big project is to take this novel that I wrote completely by myself and have AI be the most merciless editor possible and let me kind of shape this thing into a finished story. I'm also writing a novel right now, or I guess I should say crafting a novel with AI. I've got the characters written and most of the outline for a space opera type of book where I've got about 9 different main characters. They're renegades and they have the stolen spaceship and they are roaming the galaxy. They found this alien technology that is incredibly powerful and that everybody wants to kill them for, but they can't, but no one wants the technology. They can't sell it and they can't even give it away. Nobody wants it, but it's so powerful that they can't let anyone else have it. And so that's the conundrum that they're in. And so it's a novel. And so I'm just enjoying I've had all these ideas in my head for a long time and I'm actually able to kind of get them out. And because I know how to write, I'm able to use AI pretty effectively as a tool to kind of help me shape that. And so I'm really enjoying kind of leaning into that. And I'm hoping to on a sort of meta level, think about, is this where we want kids to be ultimately? Do we want them to ultimately get to the place where they have some mastery of some tool, but now with AI be able to use that mastery in their head to just become incredibly more productive and creative with the limited time that we all seem to have, but be able to really dive wholeheartedly into something thanks to this technology? I guess that's kind of where I am now.
Very cool. And you'll have to let us know when you publish one of these stories. Now that you've kind of given us a little teaser, you can't leave us hanging. This
Absolutely.
it can't be a cliffhanger episode. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Absolutely, yeah. As a sci-fi fan, I look forward to reading your book. It's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Douglas, for all of your time. You're up early in the morning in California, and where I'm up late in Hong Kong. But it's been a fantastic conversation, and very much looking forward to having you at our events in 2026.
It's my pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas.
Thanks.
Take care.